The Verge recently sat down with Pierre-Luc Graffet. If you don't know who he is, he works at Valve. Mostly, he's famous for working on the Steam Deck, and now Valve's recent announcements, the Steam Controller, the Steam Machine, and the Steam Frame. And in their interview, he basically told them what Valve's plan is moving forward. That's one of the things I really like about Valve is, for the most part, they're pretty transparent when it comes to what their plans are. They do keep some things close to their chest, but I think that in recent years, we've been seeing a lot more openness from Valve. I mean, that's one of the things that kind of started this whole Steam operating system thing going is, Gabe Newell looked at what Windows was doing with Windows 8 and said, you know what, I don't really like closed systems. I prefer open systems. So I'm going to put my money where my mouth is, and I'm going to make an open system. I'm going to turn Linux distro into SteamOS and use that to launch games on. The big problem with that is that Windows games are made to run on Windows. They're not made to run on Linux. And so Valve had to come up with solutions. Now, I'm not going to retread all of the things that Valve did in order to turn their previous failure with the Steam machines and the Steam controller into the success that we see with the Steam Deck. I have multiple videos talking about that, linked down below that like button. In today's video, I want to talk about what exactly Valve's plan is and what Pierre-Luc Graffet told The Verge about it. So let's start with the first question that they asked him. They asked him, why ARM? And if you're not sure what that means, well, then what you really need to think about is, what is ARM? There's really multiple kinds of chip architecture out there. When you think about PC gaming, most of the time you're thinking x86 is the architecture of the chip. ARM is a different architecture for chips. It's usually found in phones. It's found in like Apple laptops and stuff like that. It is usually very good at being extremely efficient while also being pretty damn powerful. Now, I will say that in the past, the GPUs that go into ARM chips are usually fairly weak because they don't need to be super powerful. But Valve has seen the writing on the wall, and they've said, all right, we know that there's going to be devices out there that we want to run on batteries, and those batteries are going to be much better off if they're running on an ARM chip, because ARM chips don't use as much energy. So we need to make sure that our games will run on ARM. Here's what he had to say. In 2016 and 2017, there was always this idea that we would end up wanting to do that. And that's where the FEX compatibility layer was started, because we knew there was close to a decade of work needed before it would be robust enough so people could rely on it for their libraries. There's a lot of work that went into that. It all started with the same assumption that you're going to get the same experience on ARM. You're going to have the same set of games. You're going to be able to run them without having to worry about what architecture your computer is using. What really was our goal was to try and reduce barriers for users, not having to worry about what games run and what developers are going to use as starting points for these new devices. This very much reminds me of Nintendo's mission statement when it came to the Wii. They wanted to reduce barriers for customers. They wanted to make it so customers who didn't have a lot of experience playing video games would feel comfortable playing a game on the Wii. And that's why they shaped the controller like a remote control, because everybody knows how to use a remote control. This isn't quite the same thing, but it just reminds me of that. This is saying, look, if I want to play a game that I bought, I shouldn't have to think about what device is it going to be played on. I shouldn't have to know that, oh, these games don't work on my phone. These games will only work on this. And I think that that's a really good point. It makes the barrier to entry for consumers much lower. And by lowering that barrier to entry, it gives Valve an easier way to access those consumers. And I think that that's really smart, both from a business perspective and from a consumer perspective, because now I'll have less to think about when I decide whether or not I'm going to buy a game on Steam. But I don't think that means that Valve is anticipating that everything moving forward is going to be ARM chipsets. A lot of people are still going to be using x86 chipsets. And, there's for really, really good reasons. When you look at ARM chipsets, yes, they are way more efficient, but they're not nearly as powerful as x86 chipsets at the same, when you're running the same kind of tasks. There's a lot of price points and power consumption points where ARM-based chipsets are doing a better job of serving the market. When you get into lower power, anything lower than a Steam Deck, I think you will find that there's an ARM chip that is maybe competitive with the x86 offerings at that segment. And I agree with that. But notice what he didn't say. He didn't say that ARM is going to be everything, everywhere, for everyone all at once. No, he said on cheaper devices where energy is really, really important, ARM is what you're going to want to go for. And Valve wants to target customers that have those devices. So that's why they started working on FEX. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with it, FEX is essentially a version of Proton that works for ARM chips. And to rewind even further, if you're not familiar with what Proton is a translation layer that allows you to take a Windows API call. So a game needs something to happen. It calls for a Windows API. Proton goes into its little dictionary, finds the Linux version of that API, hands it over to the game runs, you get to play your game. This is really good because it allows you to play games on Linux that you otherwise wouldn't be able to. Something that Valve realized that was absolutely 100% needed after their original failure 10 years ago with the Steam machines. When it comes to FEX, not only are you translating Windows API calls over to Linux API calls, but you also have to translate x86 architecture stuff over to ARM architecture stuff. And with that comes performance hits. However, Pierre-Luc Graffet said in this interview that if you get to the API call level, then you're not going to have those performance hits as much. And right now, they're still working towards reaching that level, which is why it's not 100% ready yet to run every single Windows games on x86 architecture and run it as a Linux game over on ARM architecture instead. But the newer version of SteamOS is going to include both Proton and FEX, and it doesn't matter what device you're running it on, it's going to have both. It's the exact same operating system components, the exact same Arch Linux base, all in the same updater, all the same technologies. Depending on form factors, you might have different pieces of software that you want running or not running, and some of those make more sense on a handheld, some make more sense on a headset, some in a desktop form factor, but all of those options are always available as part of the core OS. So when you're looking at SteamOS on ARM, you're really looking at the same thing as SteamOS on x86. Instead of downloading a normal Proton that's built for x86 and targets x86 games, it will also be able to download a Proton that's ARM aware, and that is the bulk of its code compiled for ARM and can also include the FEX emulator. Now, the FEX emulator's entire purpose is to provide a way for you to play x86 games on ARM or run x86 software on an ARM chipset. It takes x86 code and then uses a just-in-time or JIT translator to emit ARM code that does the exact same thing. Proton, built for ARM support, will make sure that whenever it's setting up code segments, any code segment that is x86 will jump into FEX, be run through FEX instead of through the native CPU. And because of that, you're going to have performance hits on that. And the reason that that works is because you are running ARM native code built as part of Proton. The only part that you have to emulate is the code that is owned by the game itself. So the performance hit of any emulation that you're doing stops as soon as you make those API calls between Windows and Linux. And for everybody that thinks that Valve saw success with the Steam Deck and decided to continue with this, I disagree, and it's backed up here with what Pierre-Luc Graffet says next. He says that code developers have been funded by them since the beginning. Basically, Valve is funding FEX. They are paying developers to make this happen. They started the entire project with the idea that it would be something that's useful for the ecosystem at large, but also something that would be really useful for SteamOS and other applications in the future. And they saw that ARM was going to be really, really important because so many low-power devices use ARM chips. That means there's a lot of customers that they would not be able to reach because the entire Steam library is made with x86 architecture in mind. And I've seen tons of people asking for developers and publishers to make ARM versions of their games. What Valve is saying here is that we don't want to ask you guys to make new versions of your games. They don't want you to port your games over to other systems. That's too much work. They expected that before, and that's why the Steam machines failed, because they didn't have Proton, and they said, hey, developers, can you make Linux versions of your games? And the developers said, it's not worth, the juice isn't worth the squeeze, so no, we're not going to do that. Well, so what Valve is going to do instead is write FEX or pay somebody to write FEX and have FEX do the work for them so that developers don't have to worry about porting to ARM. And the Steam Frame is Valve's first ARM device. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be all ARM devices moving forward because, like they said before, it's really good for low power things that absolutely need batteries and stuff like that. But when you're looking to get more power out of a chipset, it's much easier to go with x86 unless you're really doing the crazy stuff that Apple does, because their chipsets are incredibly powerful and they're very energy efficient, and they are ARM chipsets. And if you've watched any episodes of my podcast, I'm sure you've heard Carrie, aka the Fox, talk about how the future isn't necessarily ARM, but part of the future is ARM. And that's what Valve is saying here as well. And if you think Windows API calls translated over to Linux API calls, or x86 architecture translated over to ARM architecture is the only two things that Valve has going on here, you're mistaken there too, because the Steam Frame, which is Valve's new headset, it is an ARM chipset, but it's not running Android, but it is running Android games. It is a similar compatibility layer as Proton, just targeted at Android instead. There's not a whole Android API and implementation there, just a subset mostly targeted towards games, providing the right libraries on our side so that things typically contained in an Android executable can run. They're already targeting ARM, so you don't need to do emulation on the code that's contained there. You just need to set up the libraries and executable in such a way that it can run in the first place. And with Valve saying that, I think a lot of people are going to start wondering, okay, so Valve is making this way so you can run Windows games on Linux. They're making it so that you can run x86 games on ARM. They're making it so you can run Android games on Linux. And so the next logical conclusion is Valve going to ship a SteamOS for phones. He said they're not discounting any possibility, but he thinks with just living room, handheld, and desktop, trying to have a good outcome for gaming applications and everything else you'd want to have to do on a desktop, they already have a ton of work to do. So I don't think they're necessarily getting ready to ship SteamOS for Android. I mean, look at it. They haven't already shipped SteamOS for desktop for everybody at this point. Right now, it's a very small subset of hardware that you can run SteamOS on. And then the big question, the thing that I think most people want to know, when Valve is putting all of this attention on ARM architecture instead of x86 architecture, I think a lot of people assume that that means Valve is looking at ARM as the future of gaming. And I don't think that that's necessarily what they're saying here. In fact, he says, I think ARM devices are definitely a good fit for lower performance, like anything lower than the Steam Deck, but it's possible it'll be a good option for something on the order of a Steam Deck performance envelope. We really don't try and steer the market one way or the other. We just want to make sure that good options are always supported. One thing that he said there that I think is really important is at a lower envelope right now, it's already pretty good for ARM. And that's really important because when people think about gaming, usually what people think about are the big AAA massive titles that everybody's playing that you really got to have performance for. But the vast majority of games that are running on SteamOS, or just on Steam in general, not SteamOS, the vast majority of games that are running on Steam, they're pretty low power games. You don't need to spend $1,000 on a graphics card to really enjoy most games on Steam. And that means if they can get the FEX translator or the FEX emulation to work well enough that performance hit that you do get from running x86 games on ARM, if it runs well enough, then you're going to be able to play most games, most of your Steam library on these chips in the future. And I'm not saying it's going to be happening this year or next year. This is clearly something that Valve is working on over time. And honestly, think about it. If they weren't thinking as to, like, if they thought it was really good enough now, they wouldn't have built streaming into their headset. Their headset is built around streaming because they know that the FEX translation layer isn't ready yet. It'll run lower power stuff, and that's awesome. But if you need more power, well, then you're going to want to transmit that wirelessly from your Steam machine or your big $3,000 rig over to your Steam frame instead. And I think that makes a lot of sense. But Valve doesn't have to do everything themselves. This is something that they tried in the past, but I think they skipped a step, and it was a very, very important step. And it's one of the reasons that the original Steam machines and Steam controller failed, especially with the Steam machines. They went with partners to make these devices instead of making it themselves. And it's clear that they learned from their mistake. We now have the Steam Deck, we have the upcoming Steam machine, as well as the Steam frame. So Valve is now giving a reference point. He said, I think the first step is for us to ship what we have, and that will show the way. And we kind of saw that when it came to handhelds. Yes, there were handhelds before the Steam Deck, but after the Steam Deck came out, the interest in that space really grew a lot. And I think that Valve knows that that's the right way to go, by leading the charge and then saying, hey, everybody, come with me. That's one of the reasons why I personally think, even though I'm not super happy about 8 gigs of VRAM in the Steam machine, I think that that's fine because Valve is leading the charge. And there's going to be other manufacturers, or hell, I could just do it myself, but there'll be other manufacturers that are going to build systems that are going to be more powerful, but also more expensive. And Valve doesn't have to build every single one of those. In fact, they said that it will be made easier and easier over time because they're going to keep building hardware support. We'll keep greasing the wheels, so to speak, so that SteamOS can work on a wider variety of ARM devices, but also so that the catalog becomes more reliable in terms of compatibility and performance. And he said that in the past that companies have reached out to them, or they have reached out to other companies in order to get hardware like this out on the market. And that's happening now with Steam machine-like systems as well. They already have people reaching out because they want to be somebody that has made with SteamOS on the package so that they can sell it, because they know that people are very interested in SteamOS right now. So basically what he's saying here is, look, we made the Steam Deck, and then other companies came to us, or we reached out to them and said, hey, you want to make a version of your handheld that has our operating system on it? Lenovo, go ahead and do that. Now they're doing the same thing with the Steam machine. People who make living room devices are reaching out saying, hey, can we put SteamOS on our devices? And Valve is saying, let us get ours out the door first, make sure we've got all of the things nice and frictionless, and then we'll talk about that. And they're also anticipating that when they've got the Steam frame, which runs on ARM, we're going to see a bunch of devices, I think, in the future that do have SteamOS on them, or at least are using FEX to translate between x86 and ARM architecture so that we have these nice low-power devices that we can play games on anywhere that we go. And the thing that Valve gets out of that is easier access to customers, because now they're reaching into our wallets way more often, giving us more places where we can buy games from them. And that is, of course, what they want to do. But what do you guys think about Valve's plan? Let me know in the comment section down below. And if it's your first time here, please subscribe. I'm this close to 100,000 subs, and it would be really cool to hit that by the end of the year. Anyway, thanks for watching. I'll see you on the next one, I hope. Stay rad, everybody.